Welcome to the Goalie Hacks podcast, the show dedicated to providing elite tips, hacks, and strategies to take your game to the next level, where we help you become an elite goaltender, one hack at a time. And now, here's your host, Mike Santaguida.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Goalie Hacks podcast. I'm super excited to be joined today by Brandon from IQ Goalie, the Instagram channel, where he publishes a 5-part e-magazine every month about the science related to goaltending development and performance to help goaltenders, parents, and coaches alike learn more about goaltending and how to step their game up using specific scientific methods taken from clinical research studies. He's only been around for 7 or 8 months, but he's been making absolute waves in the space, going from 0 to 4K followers in just 5 to 6 months and literally doubling his follower count in the last 2 months to almost 8K since I've been around. He's already gotten tons of support from NHL goalies and coaches alike, and I couldn't be happier to have him today to have a discussion. Brandon, thanks for coming on, man. How you doing, bro?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Things are good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem, man. Well, it's nice to finally meet you, man. I've been following your stuff on my personal page for a while, and obviously you and I have become a little bit closer these last couple months since I went online with this. But it's nice to finally connect, sort of in person, man.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. No, it's good. Yeah, thanks for the intro. It's nice. I guess I didn't realize that.
Yeah, no problem, man. I mean, I hope I didn't sell you short.
Oh, that's great. I didn't even realize that it doubled in the last 2 months. That's good.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, I've been keeping track. I keep track of things on my end, but
That's awesome.
I guess I just want to say I love the work you're doing, man. I think you're doing the goalie community, a tremendous service by publishing research and that you gather. And I'm personally a big believer in taking a scientific approach when it comes to goaltending. And I couldn't be happier to have you on as my first guest. I feel like our brands, sort of intertwine quite a bit, and I couldn't think of a better person to come on the show first. So let's not waste any time because we have a lot to go over. So let's jump right in. Why don't you just start off by telling my audience who you are, what's your background, what's Goalie IQ Goalie, and what's the origin story and how you got started?
Sure. So, Brandon Thibeau. I'm from New Brunswick in Canada, and grew up just like any other kid. Played hockey, and I ended up playing major junior out here, and then played some junior A out here, and then went to university and had a 4-year university career. So I got to play a lot of goalie for sure. I got to be on the ice a lot. I've been away from the game for about a year and a half now. I retired about a year and a half ago. After university, I went on to do a master's degree, and just decided that I should probably focus on school to make sure that all pans out. So yeah, and then I started scouting in there as well about 4 or 5 years ago. So doing some of that in major junior leagues out here, and obviously doing some coaching at my home camp, Atlantic Goaltending Academy. So I do classroom sessions and coaching there, and so that's kind of how this all started. So I have a pretty extensive background in goaltending, and that moved on to the classroom. So when I was at University of Moncton doing my bachelor's degree, I took psychology, and then I minored in biology. Then after that, from there, went to uh, Dalhousie University, and now I'm studying physiotherapy now. So doing my master's degree, and it kind of all started with just getting the opportunity to mingle with a lot of really good goalie minds through scouting and playing in university and things like that, and meeting some of the best. And I think that the biggest kind of aha moment for me for IQ Goalie was when I took some time away from the game and just looked at it from a different perspective and saw kind of what the game might need or what I thought I could contribute as someone who's studied and someone who's played a lot and coached a lot. So that's kind of where the idea came from. So what I decided to do was start this IQ Goalie account, and it really flourished quickly. People enjoy it, and then it led to kind of the IQ Goalie e-digest, so the magazine, the online magazine that we have. And yeah, basically, like you mentioned, it's just kind of a compilation of work that researchers have done. Moving into interviewing researchers about their research related to the position, related to sports science, and whatever goalies may find interesting. So yeah, that's kind of how the story played along.
Just want to give a quick shout out to our partner and sponsor, NeuroTracker. NeuroTracker is incredibly effective cognitive training software developed and backed by arguably one of the best neuroscientists in the world, used by elite athletes in every major sport, including the NHL, NBA, NFL, and the MLB. It trains a variety of cognitive functions that are imperative to both athletes and coaches, both on the ice and outside the rink. I've used the software for years now, and I can't wait to tell you guys more about it. To kick off our sponsorship, we're giving away 2 free subscriptions, so make sure to stick around for the whole episode to catch how to enter in this giveaway. Nice, man. So I guess, leading off of that a little bit, when do you played the game, you said you played the game and you've been away from it, and that's when it sort of, this whole idea sort of dawned on you. But I guess when you played, were you really into the science when you played? You know what I mean? Like, was it really just talking to all those scouts that you got a keen interest, or is this kind of something that you think with your game over your time playing that it's you've kind of honed in on the science and were sort of a student of the game in that realm? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think that when I was playing, I was very particular about what I did. I was always very average, and to make it where I played, I had to be pretty particular about what I did day to day. And I honestly don't think I realized how important science and how important knowledge is when you're playing. I didn't realize it at the time, I don't think, but there was things that I was doing that I found worked very well, that now I realize, oh, that's why that worked, right?
Mm-hmm.
And things that I didn't do so well, and it's like, oh, that's why that didn't work. So I think that that's something that I learned after, and just having the opportunity to work with um, guys guys who are in the National Hockey League and pros, and connecting with them. I've connected with a few and done a couple projects with a few of them about this kind of science related to goaltending that we may not have explored so much in the game yet. And I think that's really when it took off. When afterwards, after I stopped playing, definitely thinking about it, but it really took off after.
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously, you've started to get a ton of traction, as the last couple of months, things have sped up for you. But specifically a ton of NHL support with the work you're doing, which is incredible,
Yeah.
right? I mean, so why do you think that you've started to get such strong support from the most elite coaches and players in the world, right? Like, why do you think they're getting on board so quickly and loving and supporting your work?
Yeah, I think for the first for the first part, I think that they can tell that um, it's organic. It's not something that I've kind of I don't think there's much of my opinion put into the work. I think that they enjoy that. I think that if someone who is not coaching in the NHL or playing in the NHL is going to kind of get their attention and their respect, I think you have to show them why it's legitimate.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, having the information come from interviews with researchers or, referenced research, I think that they really appreciate that. And then secondly, I think that, when I think about it, I think there's kind of two types of coaches, of goalie coaches that I've come in contact with. And obviously through the account and through other things, I've contacted so many. Um, I find that, the first type can be very skeptical
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to anything that's presented that's new, right? I'm sure you've seen the same thing.
Oh yeah, for sure.
It's yeah, anytime you present a new idea or something that's recently been researched that kind of goes against convention,
Mm-hmm.
they can be kind of defensive about what they know, and I understand that because I can be that way as well as a goalie coach. We all believe in what we believe in,
Mm-hmm.
and then I find that there's the other type, which is people that are just sponges and they're just willing to sit down and listen and take in everything and kind of add it to their toolbox. And and that's something that I obviously try to do in my coaching, and I encourage people to do. So I think that what I've noticed is that that second type, they happen to be coaching at the high levels. You
Mm-hmm.
know, they happen to be the coaches that are coaching in the NHL or in the pros, or the goalies have that mindset that are at these higher levels, and they really cling on to this stuff. It seems to be like, the younger prospect, the younger guys in the pros and in the league that are really clinging on to finding out whatever they can about the position. So I think that's why.
Mm-hmm. Getting down to the nitty gritty of things, right? Like really understanding. And I think that, like, when anything is new, like if people feel a little threatened, right? Like if people aren't mad, I mean, I think you're going in the right direction, right? Like all change always sorts of starts with some backlash, right? Like even when I was a kid, we're talking about this theory with, and obviously you've put some holes in the box control theory, but this was something that like my dad and I had thought about way back and before like the millennium turned, you know what I mean? And back then, like coaches were like, no, it's wrong. And you get all this backlash, right? But I think that at the end of the day, right, like if it works, it doesn't, the truth always wins,
Yeah.
right? So it doesn't matter if it's your opinion or something, the truth will always win and it'll come out in the world. And a lot of things over the years have with goaltending, right? They just flourish because you can't keep them back because people use them to get better, right? So I think with all that said, right, like knowing the shift that's sort of going on in the goaltending world, more toward a scientific approach, how important is it to be open to learning new things, right? Like how can coaches sort of approach that in an objective way? Because obviously goaltending is very subjective, and like we said, coaches get mad when their ideals are threatened, and there are so many ways to do things, but how important is it to be objective and open to new ideas, and how can coaches approach this and your work to try and warm up to new ideas and try new things?
Yeah, I think it's so important. It's just, if you're a coach, I think one of the things that I respect from coaches that I know and from guys I look up to and worked with is that you have your personal experience, and then you have, whatever your goalie might believe in or might want, or his specific needs, and then you have your knowledge, right? Like your facts and your toolbox. And I think that you can never have too much of any of those three factors. Like if you're a coach, you can never have too much experience.
Mm-hmm.
So on the same token, you can never have too much knowledge. And some people may see, I think a lot of people who see new info may see it as, oh, this is the way, this person is saying this is the way it has to be from now on. But that's not how it is at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just, oh, this is a piece that I can add to my toolbox. And then, you know, mixed with your experience with what your specific goaltender may need, that's how you make your final decision of how you approach a situation or a technique or whatever it may be, right? So I think that it's super important that coaches kind of open up to all of it, and you can not believe in it or you can not use it in your toolbox,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's really important to be aware, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think over my time too, like, lots of things come up that aren't good, right? That people use, and they kind of, like I said, the truth always wins, right? And they sort of make their way out of the game, whatever it is, right? So I'm totally on board with you. I think that being objective is an advantage, right? Like saying, okay, this is a new thing. Like even at face value, I might not like it. I might not think it works, but I'm going to go try it. I'm going to go try it for a few days or maybe a week. And usually I like to kind of personally gather some data, right? Like, and like I'll do a drill that's specific to something, and I'll work on that technique, and I'll see if I go like 1 for 10 or if I go 9 for 10. You know
Exactly.
what I mean? Or if I'm getting better over the course of a few days or a week. Because I think you really got to give things a chance, right? Like, people dismiss things so quick when really, even in my career, like I've just always been open to things. And like with this RVH thing specifically, like years ago, I remember seeing some kid in the WHL, and he was doing the RVH in the sweet spot in your pad, And this was like right when it came out, and I was like, oh man, like that looks sick. You know what I mean? That looks like perfect.
Yeah.
And although everybody was kind of going pad in at the time, and you even see it now, like all the goals going in because the goalies don't seal on the RVH properly. So, I mean, it's just something that, like I've picked up over the years, being objective. That was something that I wasn't able to get right away. Like it took me a week or two to really figure out, but I was like, okay, like this is probably going to make me better, like sealing and everything. So, um, obviously with that said, right, like people are coming on board now, and people are starting to buy into what you're doing, and approaching the game in a more scientific manner. What do you see right now as the biggest inefficiency in goaltending through all your work up to this point, right? Like what's our biggest blind spot as goalies that most people are or aren't talking about, that believe the position needs to move forward in?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think there's definitely a couple things I can think of. I like the word that you used, like inefficiency. I think that um, efficiency is extremely important today for young goalies and for coaches too, because when you think about it, I mean, you have 50 minutes on the ice, give or take, and you have to make the best of that 50 minutes. And on the other side of the token, you've got, your parents are paying a significant amount of money. It's an expensive ordeal nowadays, right? To become a great goaltender, it's expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So efficiency has to be well thought out.
No kidding.
And I think that taking a step back from the game and looking at some drills, not all drills, some drills, some techniques that we're using now that may not be the most efficient use of time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, we can. It's like you said, if you're doing a drill, or if you're performing some technique, what's the purpose? What are you doing it for? And how do you know that this works? How do you know that this will work? And is it just because, well, this is how we've always done it? And so many coaches are so good lately at thinking that way. And you see people, whether it's they're posting it or you're having a conversation with a coach, they know exactly why they're doing their drill, and that's something I'm really impressed with. But I still think that we could work on that for the sake of being efficient.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's definitely holes there where we can be more efficient. And then I think that the technique or the area of the game that just from chatting with goalies and from chatting with coaches and scouts, and I think that there's a huge gap in knowledge when it comes to tracking.
Mm-hmm.
I think that something that we don't quite understand to the fullest, and I think it's something that we might not know exactly how to, if we do A, B, and C, then we will be a better tracker, or what exactly tracking means. I think there's definitely some variation there. If you ask different coaches what tracking means and how it works, you'll get a lot of different answers.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those two things is something that we need to work on. And like I said, super impressed because so many coaches are becoming so good at developing new ideas in those areas. But we definitely still need to go a little farther.
Right. So how can, like, all our audience and listeners, right, and coaches, players alike, like specifically from your research and maybe your opinion from your research, obviously, because you know it all, how can we kind of overcome those things, right? Like how can people work to get better at that every day? Sort of take us through at least a process you think would be pretty efficient in doing that.
Yeah, I think that through what I've read, and I always say, the research and the things that come out in IQ Goalie, it's all done by the research and the experiments itself is all done by researchers who are extremely intelligent, passionate about their job, and they know what they're doing, right? Some people may not know that. It's just kind of relayed through IQ Goalie. But what I've seen for sure and what I can understand is that it's not necessarily what drill you're doing, but it's how you do it. So, for example, there's there's ways to develop a motor skill. So if you're trying to develop tracking, it's all about what I've learned is it's all about anticipation and pattern recognition. And this is something that I was never I never considered at all as a goalie, and that I've never even talked to with a coach about. Um, we're kind of behind in hockey in general because we're a small sport on the big scale when it comes to these concepts.
Mm.
But so if we talk about, anticipation and pattern recognition and sport expertise for a minute, um, I think that's where tracking falls for goaltending. Because when you think about it, there's lots of research to show. I haven't seen any yet that shows that a goaltender would be able to actually, keep the eye on the puck the entire way in because of the speed of the puck and the limits of human, you know, reaction time, put simply. And there's just, a shot from a certain distance. It's impossible to be able to react to that shot in simple terms. What you can do is anticipate the shot. And what I find hard is sometimes the only training we will get for tracking will be coming from, tennis balls off ice or, a goalie drill where we're just getting repetitive shots from, usually the same shooter every goalie practice, into the glove, 20 repetitive shots into the glove. And this is good. And this is what I did when I was playing goalie. But if we think about it for a second,
Mm-hmm.
um, when you use tennis balls, there's no stick blade involved. There's no, body kinematics from the shooter involved. And the problem with that is that the goalie is not able to kind of view patterns and kind of download patterns into their brain to then anticipate what will happen next time. And there's lots of wonderful research that shows that this is how you can differentiate an expert from an amateur, is that they are able to recognize patterns a lot quicker, process them a lot faster, and anticipate the outcome in the sport. So if tennis balls are wonderful for so many things, but developing that hand-eye coordination and just being comfortable in your own skin, but we're not seeing that stick blade pattern or that body kinematic pattern. So that's one side of it. And then if we think about on another side of it, in practice, we get those repetitive shots, one after another, 20 shots to the glove by the same player. A lot of science has shown that repetition is important, yes, but what is also important to develop a motor skill and it's shown to be almost essential is that it must be challenging and it must be variable. So for you to have,
Mm-hmm.
I know for me, I always had the same shooter, usually the guy that's scratched, coming into practice and taking shots on me. You may take 20 shots on you, and that would be your tracking warm up, right? But you're only recognizing one stick blade pattern in that tracking training.
Mm.
Does that kind
Interesting.
of make sense?
Oh yeah, for
So
sure.
we should make that variable, right? So ideally you take, 4 or 5 shooters, get them to switch in and out and shoot wherever instead of going 20 to the glove, 20 to the blocker. You're saving them all and then leaving the ice. So if we think about the challenge portion, we know very well that if a motor skill or a motor pattern is not challenged, um, there's not as much development on that skill. Like realistic changes at a brain level. If the person, the athlete, or any person is not challenged, so challenge is a big part. So if we're making 20 saves in a row and dropping it, that's good. It may be a warm up. It may be good for plenty of things. But if we're training tracking, we're not really getting any better. And I think that that's a big misconception,
Mm-hmm.
but also we're very lucky to have this information that we can then apply it to tracking now that we know this stuff. So I think those two things, anticipation and just the principles of pattern recognition and the principles of how to learn a motor skill. It's so important to understand that, and it's something that can be applied very quickly and learned very quickly, thanks to all these wonderful researchers who have done so much work on it and other lots of times other sports, but hockey as well.
Hmm. It's interesting you say that. What do you think about, like, if we're doing tracking? So you're saying that the best thing to do if you're doing tracking work is to kind of swap shooters just to get a different look on that release.
Yeah, I mean it's one tool that you can add to the toolbox just because of that variability part. So if we think about it, and um, I hope that that makes sense as I've put it. It's very important to that the brain is able to recognize certain patterns, so that in a game, when it's happening very quickly and automatically, those patterns lead to results. They lead to anticipation and prediction, and a correct prediction so that you can make a save because everything happens so quickly. So the way to kind of, I like to use the word download those patterns is through, um, variability. Because if you have the same shooter shooting on you, doing your goalie practice, and I just use that example because that's one thing off the top of my head I can think that I did that I would have changed. You always use the guy that was scratched. You're going to become very good at recognizing his pattern of release, and it's a very specific thing if we want it to translate into a game.
Hmm.
So if we make that variable, if we see 4 or 5 different patterns, then you then will be able to, download or understand what all those patterns have in common, so that when you come into a game situation, you see certain things
Mm.
and create better anticipation. So it's just one tool that you can add to the toolbox. And I think it's a good example to show kind of the way that we should be thinking about tracking. I think it's really one thing that we could change simply. A very small thing, but
Hmm.
yeah.
I agree. No, I couldn't agree more. It's funny you say that because a lot of guys these days are starting to use like 75 flexes, and the release is like really delayed. Like I notice it when I play. Like as soon as a guy shoots on me, I can tell right away if he has a 75 flex. And usually it's a little bit harder, right? Because it, even though he's bending into the stick, the timing of it is all different. So you constantly, I agree with you, you constantly need to be thrown some variability in the tracking stuff just to build that repertoire, like in terms of a database in your head, sort of that you can download and kind of aggregate all the most similar things from kind of all those shots. So
Yeah.
you're ready to go kind of when anybody comes down on you, right?
Yeah, and I think that a misconception that I had when I played was that, if I'm creating this database in my head, that it's a conscious thing that I'm thinking about, and maybe I have to write it down or study each release over and over. But the reality is, and science will tell us that this is happening very automatically
Right.
without us knowing. So we have to put our brain in the situation that it can learn properly. Is how I like to explain it. So this is happening without us realizing it. If we train a certain way with no variation at all, or very rudimentary, not challenging, then our brain won't naturally learn this skill better. But if we change certain things and add certain components um, that research backs up, then we'll be able to. We don't even have to think about it; it happens automatically. So that's something that's nice, and just a point that I always tell my goalies.
Hmm. Well, obviously, you've probably gone through a lot of research already and with plenty more to come. But throughout your work, what was sort of the biggest aha moment for you where there was sort of a gap in our knowledge that you sort of found the puzzle piece to help answer that question and fill in that void?
Um, I think it really is. I like to talk about the anticipation side of it. I think that was the biggest aha moment for me. Like you put it, I think that the biggest reason is because you know we have the classic situation where we'll say that a goalie gets a shot from close range, and he has, wow, that goalie has terrible rebound control. But then when you look at it from a scientific perspective, human reaction time has a limit, right? There's only a physical limit to how quickly a human can react.
Mm-hmm.
And a certain shot speed and a certain distance away from the goalie, it's theoretically impossible to react to a shot. And that was a big aha moment for me, just understanding that, because it changes how you talk about the position. You have to start thinking about, well, if it's theoretically impossible, just like it's theoretically impossible for a baseball player to hit a ball because of the speed of the pitch
Mm-hmm.
and the distance of the mound from the plate. If that's theoretically impossible, then how do we do it? And the answer to that, or one of the answers to that, seems to be through anticipation. And so studying that area of it and looking at that area has probably been the biggest eye opener to me, because I feel like that's something that I was never spoken to about, and I think it's something that we're not really sure how to train
Mm-hmm.
or how to coach it. So I think that was a big thing for me, and really passionate about that part, and some great researchers that you can see in the magazine that are all, and all of the studies that are kind of reported on in kind of like a news article fashion in the magazine. They're all there. They're all referenced, so people can go and download those, buy those, read them for themselves, kinds of thing. And I really encourage that, because there's so much knowledge out there that we can reach out to.
Obviously, I mean, and kind of I'm asking you this question, right? Like you said, anticipation. Is there a point where we're over anticipating, or we can get to that point where it actually like throws off our game? Like, kind of, where's walking that line? You know what I mean, in terms of like from a mental and a physical standpoint? Because I think we both know from experience that you can definitely over anticipate and look silly out there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So where's that line that you think in training and stuff like that?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. I think that there is a very distinct difference between what goalies do automatically without thinking, that happens in split seconds, and what goalies do consciously, what goalies think about consciously, which may be, anticipating a certain play. So just to think of an example of those two things, if you're thinking consciously about something, it's okay, power play coming up. I know that this team loves to run the umbrella, and I have a right handed shooter on my blocker side looking for a one timer. I'm going to consciously be aware of that and anticipate that. So that's one type of anticipation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not necessarily the type of anticipation that I'm looking at in tracking, and that researchers are looking at in tracking. It's more so the split second, milliseconds leading up to the shot, um, automatic, uncontrolled reaction, right? Because every goalie can explain to you, if you ask a goalie, how did you play so well that game? Like, how were you so on? And they'll tell you, well, things just happened, right? It's just happened. There wasn't much thinking going on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so those two types of anticipation, or those two types of processes in goaltending, conscious and unconscious, are extremely important to understand. So an example of an anticipation that would just happen automatically would be, well, I'm a very experienced goalie. I've been in the National Hockey League for 5 years, um, whatever it may be, or I've played, AAA, Pee Wee, whatever it may be. um, I understand that this body movement, a turn of the stick blade back means that the shot's going to go high, just for a rudimentary example.
Mm-hmm.
And when the stick blade is faced towards the ice, well, the shot's going to be low, right? That's something that happens automatically without thinking in a conscious way. So that's how I like to explain it to my goalies, is to understand that there are two different types of anticipation. And I really think, to speak to your point, if you are overthinking the conscious type of anticipation, overthinking the game, what might happen next, and really trying to think of it on a conscious level, I think you can get in a lot of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some science to back that up too, that you can get in a lot of trouble if you think too much. And if things just happen naturally and you let things happen automatically because you've kind of solidified your skills, then that's where we kind of stay out of trouble.
So I guess that's a great thing. I want to kind of lead into that a bit because I think that a lot of people get into funks where they overthink the game. I think that you and I can probably both speak to that. So I think for people, how can they sort of find that flow, overcome that sort of overthinking mentality? Like, what can people do specifically to sort of, train so that way the game sort of flows for them when they get to the games?
Yeah, that's a good question. When I think about, I often get questions of, what can goalies do specifically if they're struggling mentally or struggling with a mental skill. And the answer I always go to is to speak to a mental performance coach. If people don't know about that, there's sports psychologists who are registered psychologists and they deal in the area of sport. And then there's also mental performance coaches. So someone who would have a master's degree in sports psychology, for example, and they become mental performance coaches. I always tell them to go there if you're struggling, because a lot of people do ask those questions. So that's where I would direct them to. It's important to go to the professionals that have experience in that area. But when you're just talking about in general, like if you're not really struggling, but you want to give yourself every edge possible, I think that it's really important to think about um, presenting your body, uh, your physical. I like to call it with my goalies, the physical brain, and then your emotional brain, so the mood. You have to present yourself properly to the game. So every time you present yourself to a game, you have to be in the right state of mind. Your body has to be in the right state, and your physical brain. So sleep or having enough water affects the brain. Too much sugar, it would affect the brain. Things like this. You have to be in the right state. Um, so that would be the biggest thing I would push for guys that are having trouble with that side. Because if you want all those automatic processes to work, to go well, to be sharp, you have to present yourself properly to the game. And however that is for you, and whatever information you can find on that, I encourage goalies to do that. But again, if there's something you're struggling with, or you're struggling with your concentration, or you're struggling with you know nervousness about performance, then 100% you should go talk to a performance coach, and they're so good and so helpful for those kinds of things.
Hey guys, have you been looking for that next edge on the playing field? If you haven't heard of NeuroTracker yet, you will soon. Hailed by the New York Times as having grown into the most successful brain training game in sports, the NeuroTracker has over 50 plus clinical case studies done on the software and is by far the best software in the athletic performance neuroscience space. It's proven to be significantly effective and efficient in increasing performance, awareness, focus, and accelerating return to peak game shape after injuries are resolved. So make sure to stick around to the end of the show as we'll be revealing details on how to enter into the NeuroTracker giveaway. So I'm sure you got a lot of tips in your repertoire, but I'm going to pop this question. If you could only publish one, and I'll say hack ever to your page up to this point, what do you think is the hack that people need to start implementing that can dramatically increase their performance? And you can give me like one mental or one physical, maybe if you want, like what would people benefit most from knowing?
Yeah, I think the beauty about IQ Goalie too is that there's a lot of complicated discussion that can be had, and there's a lot of complicated concepts that are out there, and that need to be understood. But the beauty of it is that it always seems to lead to very simple things, a very simple solution. And that's the point, right? Is not to confuse anyone. And that's what these researchers want. They want to come up with simple strategies. I think that the biggest thing, I'll be honest with you, is um, mentally or just, as a from a brain standpoint, is get your 8 hours of sleep and get into bed a few nights before the game, before 10 o'clock, right? Not sleeping from 12 to 8 in the morning, but from 10 to 6 or from 10 to 8 or whatever it may be.
Hmm.
I can honestly say from experience and from what I've read and research on sleep, just from my personal opinion as a coach, that's the biggest thing I'll push. If we could call it a hack, I honestly think that a goalie who does that and a goalie who doesn't is truly going to have it as a hack.
Hmm.
The the benefits are exponential, and it's funny because everybody always talks about get a good night's rest, but a few nights before a game or even a week before a game, how essential that is at a chemical level. What I've come to learn is incredible how important it is, and how all these things that I've kind of gone on about this these automatic processes and this recognition and anticipation and being sharp. This doesn't happen if we don't have the proper sleep. Like if you don't get your sleep,
Hmm.
if you don't take care of that, these things just you can be the most in shape, the most whatever you want, but these things won't be optimal. So that's something to keep in mind. That's the biggest thing I think from that standpoint. And then uh, from a physical standpoint, or I guess an on ice standpoint, the biggest thing I would say would be to have more situational drills in your practices and create situations. Um, if you want to take a practice and you know double what it's worth, just from a motor learning standpoint, make it something that is task specific. It's realistic and it's going to happen in a game, and then make it variable. Create the opportunity for you to download those patterns subconsciously and for you to repeat those patterns over and over so that they come out automatically in a game. You can kind of reap your benefits in the game. I would say those are the biggest two things that I'd really want all my goalies to know and to start with.
It's funny you mentioned sleep as being the most important thing because I mean I've actually taken a nap like every game since I was like 7 years old, and we'll kind of talk about that. But from personal experience too, um, just nowadays, like as I'm getting older, you know what I mean? Like I'm not young as I used to be, I guess, still young in the grand scheme of things, but in the hockey world, right? Uh, I just notice it a lot more like into my older age, right? Like, if I get bad sleep, my mental clarity is just awful. And managing and pro hockey, I know, just because the travel can be tough unless you're playing in the American League or the NHL. Getting the right amount of rest and planning that stuff is super important. And I couldn't agree more with you. So I think in tune with that, right? You kind of gave us, like what to get the night before. What do you think about naps in terms of game day naps? Like, necessary, unnecessary, some time maybe, with some of the science and research you've done, you know what I mean? Would you recommend that to goalies? Because personally, that's something that is a huge difference. When I don't get a nap in before a game or something like that, like I can kind of tell that I'm fighting it that night. So what's your take on taking a nap?
Yeah, I'm 100% a supporter of the nap for sure. I did it my entire career, and then I always encourage it. But like I always say, it depends. And I think that that's something that I've really come to learn is that if someone asks a question and you're going to answer it, in a detailed way with scientific backup or with really thought out backup,
Hmm.
I feel like the answer always starts with it depends. So, it depends on the length of the nap. That's what's become important. So a nap that is very short, a 20 to 30-minute nap is so beneficial in a lot of ways. But a nap that is too long can cause some difficulties. With the reason being because of the stages of sleep. If we get into certain stages of sleep, then we're kind of mimicking a sleep cycle, which should be happening at night. etc. So,
Mm-hmm.
I won't dive too much into that because, it's not something I have all, I'm not an expert in that area at all. But I do know that for a fact that it depends on how long the nap is. So that's something I'll definitely try to reach out to for some research and connect with some researchers about that so I can publish an article on that. But I was reading something last week about the length of naps
Mm-hmm.
and efficiency of naps. And it's very important to not go too long. I think a sleep cycle would be, about an hour and a half. And if you get into those deeper sleeps and then you set your alarm to wake yourself up when you're in a deeper sleep, then you will wake up, groggy and not rested. Whereas if you take a quick nap, just to get those benefits of, those quote unquote refreshing benefits at a brain level, body level, then that's super beneficial. So I would encourage people to look into the length of naps, but I'm definitely a big supporter of the nap. Yeah, it's very beneficial.
Well, I look forward to seeing some research on that in your next issue. Obviously,
Yeah.
I'm an annual subscriber now, and I love the work you've been doing, man. It's well sourced. It's incredible. So, what is the biggest challenge in your opinion that goaltenders face today? Right, like it could be anything: physical, mental, gear, relationships. Like I don't know. What do you think is the biggest challenge we face? Because obviously decade to decade, goaltending is just every decade has a different face. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, yeah.
where do you kind of see those challenges that lie for us? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that I think two things really come to mind when I think of that. The first one would be just in general the mental toll that goalies have to deal with, right? The game's getting bigger, and there's more people paying attention to, every time you step on the ice, whether you're in minor hockey or in high school or in the pros, there's always someone paying attention to you. And I think that the mental toll that comes with that is pretty tough. So I think that's a challenge for our goalies. I think every goalie could speak to that, and I think it's really important. If we think about what Justin Goldman is doing with the goalie guild with lift the mask, I think that's so important. It's crucial because that's a big thing. It's a real thing for a lot of goalies. And then on the other side of things, uh, like a tidbit that I find is so tough for goalies these days is size, and I think that that's a debate that people love to have, and it's something that we need to talk about, is size. If you're under 6'2", then you have no chance. That mentality, I think, is a huge, huge challenge for goalies these days. Um, and I personally, I'm not the type of person that will say that a goalie under 6'2" is not going to make it.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think that way. I don't believe that. So size is a massive barrier for a lot of goalies because the people looking at you, they want, if they see a taller guy and they don't want to be wrong about their opinion, they may go with a taller guy. That's just the reality of hockey.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, I think it's a big issue for the goalies who are 5'10" or 6 foot even. Um, but I just think that size is not a deal breaker, but it definitely is a massive hurdle. Yeah. So yeah.
Anymore at least, and I can speak from experience. I'm only like 5'8", 5'9" on a good day. So I
On a
mean,
good day, yeah.
throughout my whole career, yeah, on a good day, throughout my whole career, that was just a huge barrier. I mean, like you, I think you and I are the same age, but that was sort of like the Jaguar era, right? Like before like 2010, and we sort of like moved out of it. But I think that relating to some of the things that you said, right? Like tracking ability is so important. And I think nowadays that obviously the game is just getting so fast, and I even see it. You see it all the way down to every level. You see it all the way down to AAA. Like you see the skill, the speed is just crazy. The hockey IQ, the depth of hockey IQ, like amongst all the players on teams everywhere, is just completely like accelerated.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think for me, a big thing is just like if you're in front of the puck like you can make the save, right? So the big goalies nowadays, right? Like you got big, quick, tall guys in the NHL. They're forced to move quicker because they just get roasted if they're not quick, right? Like guys are so smart at making plays and stuff like that you got to constantly be on your toes, have good kind of goalie IQ, read the play, you know what I mean, and put yourself in the best position. But I just quickly want to kind of touch on, something you said about the mental side of the game. And it's something that I've thought about pretty extensively, actually, since I kind of went online with this whole goalie hacks thing. It was just like, man, when I was young, like this social media stuff is just a huge problem, in my opinion, for kids because they're looking at goalies. They're like, oh man, this guy's so sick. Like, oh man, like I can never be like that. You know what I mean? Like they look up to
Yeah.
him and they're like, but they don't realize that it takes like 20 plus years to become an elite goaltender. And, for me, when I was younger, I was barely on social media at all. Like I had like, and you're from Canada. We had MSN Messenger, right? And in the States they
Yeah.
had, AOL, right? And that was the only thing I was on. Like nobody was kind of posting about their life and I just feel like nowadays, like kids get so caught up in just watching everybody else do instead of going to work themselves. So, I'm just curious kind of what's your take on the social media, and maybe for some kids listening, like how can they kind of block out that noise? You know what I mean? And because I know it gives people a lot of anxiety. It can definitely give me some at times, you know what I mean? And so what's your kind of suggestions for some kids to, kind of get around that and or overcome it if they decide to use social media?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think from a coaching perspective, young kids are they're so impressionable. They're so malleable, and it's important to make sure that they understand that they don't have to be perfect today. When it comes to social media, I think it's wonderful in so many ways. I think it's tough because everything, like you said, can be put on there, even from a coaching side of things. Everything is put on there, but at the same time, if you want to find the goalie community, where do you go? Well, you go to Instagram, and that's where the goalie community is, which is
Mm-hmm.
it's just the reality of things. For the younger kids, I think that it's so important to understand that it's okay to be the quiet one, and it's okay to take some time and step back and work on what you need to work on, and then present yourself later. And I think that that's a really important mentality to have, because the mentality today for a lot of young kids is that I need to be perfect now
Mm-hmm.
because I'm at this Pee Wee tournament where there's scouts that might decide the path of my career. But, you know, if you're good enough, coming from a scouting opinion, if you're good enough, you will be found.
Mm-hmm.
You will get there. So it's really important for kids to understand that it's okay to be the quiet one uh, that's developing in the shadows for a very long time, and then comes out when the opportunity presents itself. One of the best quotes I've ever heard was, if you want to be successful, you have to be willing to disappear for a while. So, if you realize, if you're looking online, if you're a young goalie and you see, geez, this guy is way taller than me and he's way quicker than me. Well, take those two things, write them down, and disappear for a while, and then come back with those two tools. Learn how to do it properly, learn how to train it properly, use your resources, disappear for a while, and come back and present yourself to the game and to whoever's watching with with those tools.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to not be perfect while people are watching. So yeah, it's so important. I really like how you approach that. It's very important.
Yeah, and I like the way that you said it too. And from a personal experience, I mean, when I was young, I knew I wasn't the Carey Price at, 16, 18 years old. Like I knew that. And I think so many kids like look at that and say, "Oh, Carey Price played in the NHL at 18." Like we all have different roads, right? And we all develop at different rates and we all figure things out at completely different times. So I mean, just to kind of lead off of what you're saying, just I think for everybody listening, it's really important to just focus on yourself and don't worry too much about watching everybody else or watching Carey Price at 18 going to the show, or Carter Hart. Like, there's a very select, small amount, rare occasions in this world, and especially nowadays where young goalies are jumping in, that early into the national. And I think that goalies really need to just take a step back, take their time and worry about the development. And personally, that's something I did, from a younger age. That's why I decided to go the route I did. I decided to go to prep school. I played junior, and then I went to prep school, and then I went back to junior, and then I was 2 years out, went to college, and then I went pro when I was 23, 24. And I saw that road when I was 17 years old. Like, I kind of pictured it. I said, you know what, I'm going to take the next 8 years. I'm going to work every day, every week, every month, every season, and work toward becoming an elite goaltender, right? Like, it's something that just doesn't happen overnight. And I think people really, especially in this day and age, and that's why I brought up the social media thing, because patience, man, just like patience, dude. Nobody has patience anymore. Nobody's willing to, what I like to call, enjoy the process, right? Or embrace the process, right? Like, when we go on the ice, and a lot of the drills that I put out on my page, I say to people, you're going to be bad when you first do them, right? And that's the point, because we're challenging, like you said, throwing some variability into, those motor neurons in our head. And we need to sort of, break it down and take it to a day by day kind of way. You know what I mean? Like, today I might stop 1 out of 10, but I know I'm doing the right things. And then tomorrow when I come back to the game, I'm going to stop 3 or 4 out of 10, and kind of embracing that mentality, embracing that process of like working to get better every day, and learning to excel at like each and every level, I think, so um, I appreciate you saying all that, man. I'm glad we've had an incredible conversation. Like, this is just a ton of value. I know everybody's going to get out of it. Is there kind of any last advice you want to give the audience that you feel passionate about sharing?
Um, I think that the biggest thing is for me, from the IQ goalie perspective, is to keep things simple. Do whatever you can to set yourself apart from everyone else. Be willing to do kind of the extra little bit, and I think that IQ goalie provides that. It gives you an opportunity to know something that other goalies may not have taken the time or put in the time to know, and then take those tools and pick whatever you want and talk to your coaches, talk to your personal trainer, talk to your mental performance coach, and be on the same page as all of them, so you can kind of set yourself apart from other goalies that you're really you're trying to compete against, you're trying to separate yourself from. So I think that from the IQ goalie perspective, it's really do that extra little bit, um, get that extra little bit of knowledge, and then just strictly from a coaching perspective, find a way to be different, be really really good at one thing,
Mm-hmm.
whatever your thing is that you're good at, do that, be good at that, and that'll make you stand out. Yeah, but I really appreciate I appreciate your time. Thank you.
No, man, it's been the pleasure is all mine. And I know people will find a ton of value in the conversation. I think that you and I see the game very similarly, and I believe that's sort of where the game is heading too, right? Like, I mean, neither of us are geniuses. We're just trying to do the right thing for goaltending, and I think that if everybody sort of
Exactly. Yeah.
embraces that mentality, right, like, we can help the position move forward a lot quicker, and you know kind of stop more pucks, obviously. So thank you for coming on, man. Like I said, like, ton of value here. So can you let my audience know where they can get in touch with you online, and where they can find you?
Yeah, I think the best way to find us is through the Instagram page. There's a really nice community there of people that are following. So go check us out there at IQ Goalie, and you can find us on Facebook and Twitter as well. An email to contact is on the Instagram page. It's just iqathletics19@gmail.com. So that's always open if you have any questions. And yeah, everyone's welcome. If you have any questions at all, or you know, um, I think like we said, we'll set something up for your followers so that we get them a little discount if they're interested in checking out the magazine for sure.
Right. So if people want to subscribe and they want to use a promo code, what promo code can they use to get a discount today?
Yeah, we'll make that. I'll set it up right now. Hacks, HACKS, and we'll make it all caps, and then it'll give them 20% off of the subscription. Actually, just recently in the last couple of days, we were able to get up IQgoalie.com as well, so you can
Nice.
find it there. You can get it through there, so you can check that out. That's actually brand new. So yeah, promo code hacks, all capitals, and I'll set that up for everyone.
Right. Right on. That's 20% off.
Yeah. So it comes to, for anyone who doesn't know, it's very very cheap. $4 Canadian regular price per month. A couple toonies, which in the U.S. comes to a lot less.
Yeah.
So it's a very affordable thing. I really want young kids to be able to students and young kids to be able to expose themselves to some of these things, and understand that like you said, IQ Goalie is not declaring itself a genius, just like none of these researchers are, but it's all about putting things in the toolbox.
Mm-hmm. For sure, man. So if you guys don't know, it's IQ_goalie on Instagram, and go check out his website as if you haven't yet. Obviously, just launched. I'll be checking it out right after this episode. But he's been exploding with growth the last 6 months and has gotten a ton of NHL attention. And if you haven't subscribed to his issue yet, go do that now. I am personally an annual subscriber. We all need to be students of the game. So, but hopefully we can have you back on the show sometime down the road, man, because I know you'll be continuing with your research, and I personally have a keen interest in the work you do. So thanks again for coming on the show, man. And I look forward to continuing to build this friendship we've begun to develop, and I can't wait to chat again, man.
Yeah, no problem. I appreciate you. Thank you.
All right. Take care, man.
See ya.
Without further ado, here are the giveaway details for the NeuroTracker X subscriptions we're giving away. For the record, the new version of this software is not accessible to the general public yet, as they have a new product being released very soon. So everyone getting in on this giveaway will have beta access to the new NTX system being released soon. To enter the giveaway, simply go to Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. Once you leave a review of the podcast, take a screenshot of it and either email it to goaliehacks@gmail.com or DM me on Instagram with your screenshot and your full name. Winners will be announced and shouted out on my Instagram page within 10 days of the release of this episode. Thanks again for listening, guys. If you want more details on NeuroTracker, make sure to tune into next episode, as we'll have some enormous news to drop regarding new goalie hacks protocols we're developing specifically for the software and for the ice hockey goaltending position. You will only have access to those protocols if you become a part of my organization. So if that's something that interests you, make sure to hit me up directly to get started with the software. Get excited, because I know I am. Great things to come. Take care, guys.